With that, I will let Jacob take it over. Go for it.
So my name is Jacob Ollinger. I'm an undergraduate and graduate student here at Rose-Hulman. And for my senior thesis, I looked into the role that AI plays in the medical device industry and in healthcare in general with Dr. Scribner. And so
that's my bad. I probably have to click a window.
Okay. Well, back in,
hit the button.
there we go. Okay. So back in 2019, a researcher identified the healthcare industry as the industry where AI could have the single greatest impact. However, it was limited by a large amount of lack of implementation of AI in a lot of these medical devices. And so those kind of formulated my three central research questions that I explored over the past year. And so the first of those was examining the barriers about why doctors are not implementing AI in a lot of these medical devices to assist in clinical decision making. The second was to evaluate kind of the regulatory framework that surrounds AI in medical devices and understanding how the FDA in particular interacts with a lot of these device manufacturers. And the third was to see if we could come up with a framework to increase trust in AI development so we could thereby take advantage of kind of this new software that has exploded over the past couple years. And so over the past few years, AI in healthcare has exploded. In the next 10 years, I believe that it's expected to increase by a factor of 7. And so AI in healthcare has become a huge part of the global market. And it is estimated that it can save medical providers over $150 billion currently. And so this is due to its two primary functions. It can serve as a supplement to diagnostic procedures or as a replacement. And so supplemental tasks often involve AI models that will help assist areas in X-ray machines or other diagnostic tasks to assist doctors in figuring out what is wrong with a person. Whereas replacement procedures often involve AI assisting in telehealth, and specifically where they're involved, like the AI will make an avatar and will just conduct a telehealth session with online doctors and online patients. And so as a result of that, there's a large amount of complexity in AI systems. And so one study back in 2019 conducted on Australian medical students found that over 90% of them their only knowledge about AI came from what they heard or read in the popular media. And so this has led to a large knowledge gap between medical device providers and caretakers and the clinical manufacturers who are actually designing and producing these AI devices. And so this has led to regulations trying to catch up with AI development, because in the past 10 years, AI has benefited from what one researcher called a permissionless environment in the United States, where efficiency in development of new AI devices was prioritized over everything else. And so this has led since 2017 to over 500 medical devices being approved in as little as 4 months by the FDA that were AI assisted. And so back in October, Biden issued an executive order calling for trust and safety in artificial intelligence. However, this order lacked many of the metrics that it needed to be enforceable. In the European Union, just in this past March, they passed an AI Act, that essentially called for transparency for a lot of these AI models. However, this AI Act classified companies based on, one, their applications, and two, their size, and called for greater scrutiny of these larger companies. However, let a lot of these smaller industries or smaller companies be less regulated than these large language models. And so next, we started exploring how regulations are the regulatory environment that medical devices exist in. And so primarily in 2016, there was the Century Cures Act that was passed under President Obama. And this classified software in medical devices into 4 primary categories. Software as a medical device. This is kind of the most classic understanding of software, where software essentially assists in the diagnostic procedures that doctors go along with. Software in a medical device. This has to do a lot with integrated circuits, that are implanted into a lot, like insulin pumps and other medical devices. And then software as an accessory, this can deal with a lot of like communication functions, and then our favorite AI and machine learning based devices. And so as a part of this, the FDA classifies a lot of AI medical devices as software as a medical device. And so the FDA has only so far approved locked AI models and the difference between locked and unlocked models is that locked models are trained once and then they just perform classification tasks. Whereas unlocked models can perform continuous training and validation, and these have been identified as a huge area for improvement in the medical device industry because we can continuously train these models on patients that are coming into regional doctors' offices, and as a result, reduce a lot of the geographic bias that can impact a lot of diagnostic procedures. And so the FDA's classification system for locked software medical devices is classified into 3 primary tiers. However, importantly, when the Century Cures Act was being lobbied for and pushed through Congress, it was opposed by large companies like IBM Watson and others. And in 2017, these companies got several exclusions for regulation written into law. And so these exclusions applied to things like administrative support, data management, and importantly, limited clinical support, which has led to a lot of these AI medical devices being excluded from regulation altogether or being able to be fast-tracked. And so when you go to the FDA for those medical devices that were classified as a medical device and are under regulation, there are 3 separate categories that you can be classified under by the FDA. And those are Class 1, Class 2, and Class 3. And so Class 1 medical devices are those that are well understood. So this involves like surgical scalpels or Band-Aids. These are devices that are either very, very low risk or the technology behind them is well understood, and these require very little to no regulation. Whereas Class 2 medical devices are those that are considered to have some risk to the patient, but are generally understood, and these go through essentially an FDA review process. And Class 3 medical devices are those that are considered to be high risk to the patient or life supporting. And these are the devices that require clinical trials before they go into effect. And because clinical trials are so expensive, there is a large incentive for companies to get their devices classified as Class 2 or Class 1 medical devices. So the primary method that you can go through to get your device classified as a Class 2 or Class 1 is through either a pre-market notification or 510K form or a de novo exempt request form. And so a pre-market notification involves filing paperwork with the FDA to essentially and get a ruling from them where they rule that your device is substantially equivalent to a device that's already on the market. And a de novo exempt request involves filing with the FDA to say that my device is either novel and very low risk or the technology is very well understood. Of these 2 methods, the pre-market notification is far more popular. Of the over 500 AI-assisted medical devices that have been approved, the vast majority of them deal with this ruling of substantial equivalency, where essentially if you have a new MRI machine that you are going to propose to the FDA, you essentially go with an AI software package, you go to them and you say, we think that this is substantially equivalent to one that already exists on the market, to our previous non-AI assisted model. And as a result, the FDA often rules these as substantially equivalent. And then for Class 3 medical devices, they have to go through pre-market approval, which can involve long and expensive clinical trials. And so here, essentially, this breaks down these 3 classes and the timelines for these approvals. And this 510K form exemption has led to the low lead times for approval of AI-assisted medical devices. And Class 2 and Class 1 de novo requests, this is a very subjective assessment and oftentimes done by a specific FDA reviewer. And this has led to a lack of trust in the AI medical device industry. And so in order to investigate this further, we decided to try and come up with an answer to our third research question about a framework for better addressing this regulatory gap and knowledge gap that exists. We conducted three primary things. I conducted a survey at the National Society of Radiology back in November in Chicago in order to better understand this knowledge gap and ways to address it. We also conducted AI software regulation studies, and we are going to perform a mapping of these studies onto a new framework. We subselected radiology as the primary field because this is the field in which AI has been around the longest and is the most widely adopted. In fact, at a conference I was at a couple months ago, I saw 3 different presentations on using AI and machine learning models to segment X-ray images so they can better assist in diagnosis. So this is a field where we thought we would find the most knowledgeable participants for this survey, and we would be able to obtain the best results. And so this is an example of the survey that we conducted, and we sub-selected out manufacturers, sales representatives, radiologists, and technicians as kind of our 4 primary categories of participants. Oftentimes, previous surveys done on this topic only included radiologists or medical students, or only included sales representatives. And so as a result, we are able to get a more complete picture from this survey of the actual barriers to implementation. So these are just kind of a survey of our 20 respondents. And here are some interesting observations. So one of the most interesting observations that I found from just approaching people at this conference on the AI medical device floor that they had dedicated just to AI was around 60% of the people I approached, so another 20 to 25 people, had no knowledge of AI, even though radiology is the field where there's the most knowledge about AI. And so as a result, knowledge remains a central barrier to the implementation of AI in radiology. And so here is a mapping that I created of the lack of understanding in a lot of our survey responses to kind of five primary categories or applications of AI in radiology. And so the first is documenting. So when you have a clinical visit with a clinician, they'll oftentimes either record or by hand write out notes of the visit. And so the AI can be used to assist in transcribing these into electronic medical records that insurance providers and the FDA require. Planning applications, these can be used for chemo treatments or insulin treatments, and can plan the schedule and how often and what drugs are used for treating these conditions. Learning, which is your classic image segmentation models that are applied to a lot of X-ray scans. And then discovery, these can be used in research, or these primarily are used in research, either for data set analysis, validation, or for search functionality. And then communication, this is involved in a lot of your chatbots or similar functions in which we're dealing with communicating medical information to these patients. And so from this and from the RSNA, we began to develop a framework in order to address kind of this lack of safety and knowledge gap. And so here we can see we developed according to these 5 different applications. Documentation and communication are exempt because they are considered not medical device specific or not medicine specific applications. And so they are exempt from any regulation whatsoever. And there exists this kind of gray area or knowledge gap with discovery, learning, and planning applications between regulating as Class 2 or as Class 3 applications, as well as there's currently no approval for unlocked medical devices. And so from that, we also gathered standard metrics that radiologists and manufacturers accept or have a lot of trust in. And so we are going to combine these metrics that we have combined with classifications. And from looking at further literature in the medical industry, we developed kind of a checklist framework for regulation and evaluation of the safety and trust of these models. And so we broke this out as DICE scores, AUC scores, which are both accuracy-related metrics that deal with how well a model is performing. Report turnaround time, these metrics deal with how fast or how late or how the report is generated. This is very important because doctors are often overworked and very busy. And so they want a lot of these models to work very quickly and turn and give them data. And then we also have peer review. This only subselects down as discovery methodologies. Essentially, the more people who look at a specific model, we found that they had greater trust in that model. And so these are just minimum qualification requirements. And the way that this would be applied is essentially a device would first be classified based on its common application, and then that device would have to meet these minimum requirements based on its classification. And this would allow for continuous validation as well as quick turnaround times for approval on a lot of these FDA devices and remove or limit the kind of knowledge gap that exists. And so here we have the answers to a lot of my initial research questions that we developed, where trust has become a central barrier to AI applications. And FDA regulations have not caught up with AI device development. And this framework that we've proposed is an extension to deal with this regulatory gap. And so for future work, Epic, which is a large medical device company, is coming out with AI validation software in the summer. So looking at comparing what they come out with what we already have, as well as developing a bottom-up scoring system. So what we are looking at currently, or what I've developed, is a top-down scoring system looking at the results that these models generate. And a bottom-up solution would deal with validating biases in the data set that these AI medical devices are trained on. And so this would deal with bias, number of records, and other such metrics to deal with validating both from the top, what the results that are generated, and what it is actually trained on from the bottom. And so this is a proposed mock scoring system that we are currently working on validating. So yeah, questions?
Thank you. Good.
Do you think explanation would help with the trust? Because I guess I could see it both helping and deterring people from using the doctors or physicians from using the devices to be like, I don't like that explanation. I mean, what's your opinion on it? Explanation is incorporated for the trust, not transparency.
So there still is, there is very little cross-education on AI when these doctors are actually receiving their formal training. And so they also have a lack of time as well. And so getting these explanations to them or generating them is oftentimes, it can be very hard, right? Even trying to approach these 20 radiologists and technicians, I had to essentially run around the AI floor at this, I believe it's 10,000 people. It was in the McCormick Center in Chicago. So there's a lot of radiologists, and I had to just run around begging people to get them to talk to me. And so doctors are, one, limited for time, and two, in something they understand very little about, an explanation, they might just not accept that. And so that's why we kind of focused our attention more on these metrics and these accuracy metrics that they already understand, and this turnaround time that they already are thinking about, essentially. And using these metrics to say, we can assist you and make your life easier, and please trust us, essentially.
So I'm going to tell you a brief story and then ask how your situation fixes this. So a few years ago, this was 2020, 2021, for my bioinformatics reading group, we read this paper that was trying to do a classification tool to suggest drugs to give patients. So you put in a disease, They trained this thing on like all of the chemical features for a bunch of different drugs. Pick your favorite drug, get in there. And it worked. They ended up with really high accuracy. It was delightful. And for literally any disease, this model says, take a shot of epinephrine, adrenaline, and snort some cocaine. So not good.
Yeah.
Where in your workflow would this model get caught as a like, this should not get approved?
Yeah, so when you deal with this DICE score here is essentially, AUC, excuse me, DICE has to do with mod or images. AUC is essentially an accuracy measure that deals with a comparison of false positives and false negatives to true negatives and true positives, and deals with the area under that curve. And so obviously when they applied this to real clinical data, and they essentially found that the real recommendation was that they get their arm sawed off versus take a shot of adrenaline or epinephrine, that would obviously be flagged, and so it would result in having a low AUC score and a low accuracy score when they're comparing the results, and it would not meet the minimum threshold.
Yeah. So for this model, because it was an unsupervised approach, they don't have that AUC, so they'd have to do another step of validation.
They would have to, essentially they'd have to go and compare this then with what doctors would do given similar data. And so they'd have to perform and generate some type of test set to test this validation against.
Is that adding another layer of barrier though, sort of like your, earlier you talked about the barrier for the clinical trial? Means like that system is broken? Does that mean like this system won't work for a big set of deep learning approaches?
It can depend. Essentially, even if this is FDA approved, if no one trusts what's coming out of it and no one implements it, the company's going to lose money regardless. And also many doctors have lamented, I mentioned earlier, this permissionless environment that essentially AI medical devices have operated in for the past 10 years. And so a lot of doctors kind of lament that. And so when it comes to what the actual manufacturer is going to have to do, I think they prefer to have more clear set regulations or a clear path to approval, as opposed to just, we just have to prove it's substantially equivalent. That's very subjective, and they don't have a clear idea of what that means, and they can't factor in like cost-wise analysis of what that's going to do.
Any other questions for Jacob? Okay, let's thank Jacob one last time. So that's it for this session. We've got another break back at 2:10 for our last couple PCs for the day.
I should also mention that when they forgot to mention this, a lot of these devices are trained on hospital data, and so there are vendors that provide that.